Hi, Loretta, it's Mike here. Remember, the people on the other side cannot see you yet. We're not streaming, so you need to type a message. If you're ready to stream, then let us know. But for now, they'll only be able to see messages. Okay?
We'll start streaming at 17:05, ne?
Okay, that's fine. We can do that. But if you want to type a message for them, then you can do that too. All right.
Yes.
Maybe do that, Lerato. Just indicate to them we're starting at 17:05 so that they know.
It's on tree.
Loretta, it is 5 past on my side. Would you like me to start the stream?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, good to go.
Okay.
All right. I'm starting the stream now.
Thank you.
Loretta, there's going to be no noise this time. I've made it silent, so you won't hear it say that the stream has started. But if you have a look top left-hand side of your screen, sorry, top right-hand side, you'll see a little live blue icon appear.
Okay.
Live streaming is on.
Okay, we're good.
I'm checking. Hi everyone. We're gonna start right now. Our apologies that we didn't start at exactly 5 because we're waiting for other guests to join us. Hi Sean. Thank you for the feedback. This is me. We will start right now because I'm receiving some messages. I think other guests are finding it difficult to join in. Let me quickly respond. I'll quickly respond to them so that we start. Thank you, Chairperson. I think we should start now. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I now declare the stakeholder engagement session open. Welcome to Standing Committee on Public Accounts. In short, we call it Scopa. I'm a facilitator for today's session. My name is Lerato Botman. I'm a public participation coordinator in the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. Our unit is called Public Participation and Petitions Unit. Before we start, and before I start introducing our speaker for today's session, let me first explain the process of today's session. As the Gauteng Provincial Legislature, we are striving to ensure public participation in all of its activities. Hence, we are gathered here today on a virtual platform to adhere to COVID-19 regulations by providing a free data virtual platforms. As a result, being in this platform, you will realize that you are not able to use your mic as well as your camera, but you are requested to use the chat box to submit your questions, your comments, as well as suggestions, while our speaker will be addressing us. And then I will note your messages, I will read them, and then the chairperson will respond verbally. I am not alone. I'm with the Honorable Chairperson of Scopa, honorable members of Scopa, as well as my colleagues. Before I invite the Chairperson of the Scopa to address us, I would like to introduce the Chairperson formally. His name is Honorable Sokaile Kanyile. Chairperson Kanyile joined the Gauteng Provincial Legislature in October 2008 as the head of the administration in the office of the Chief Whip. He had previously served as a councillor at the Alberton Town Council from the year 1995 to 2000. This was during the transitional phase of local government. He was the chairperson of the Finance Committee of that municipality. Honorable Kanyile became a member of the Gauteng Provincial Legislature in May 2014. During that term, he was appointed the chairperson of Community Safety Portfolio Committee and also served in the committee established to do oversight on the office of the Premier and the legislature. That committee is called OCPOL in short. Toward the end of the term in November 2018, he became the Chief Whip at the Gauteng Provincial Legislature. At the beginning of the current sixth democratic term in May 2019, he was appointed the chairperson of Scopa. Honorable Kanyile also served as the General Secretary of the Association of Public Accounts Committee. In short, it's named Apec, which is the platform for sharing best practice by Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, as well as the 9 provincial legislature. I welcome you, Honorable Chairperson, and the platform is yours to address us about today's event, why we are here, what is the work of the Scopa, and what is expected of us. We thank you. Welcome. The platform is yours, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Lerato. I'm hoping that you can see me. I just want to be clear if I'm visible.
Yes, I can see you clearly.
Thank you very much. Let me also do what you've done and say good morning. You remind me of one of our mayor in Ekurhuleni who used to say that if he sees a person for the first time, doesn't matter what time of the day it is, he'll always say good morning. So because we are meeting our stakeholders for the first time, I understand why you said good morning, but thank you very much to everybody for joining us. Thank you, Lerato, for coordinating this session. Let me just say that we are going to be talking to you about our work as Scopa, and I'm trying to share let me just share my screen quickly. So we're going to be talking about our work as Scopa, and in the intention, as you will see just now. Can you see the presentations, Lerato?
Yes, Chair, I can see the presentation.
Thank you very much. This is the second of our dialogue. This time is with students, and we thank you for joining us. We hope that by the end of this session, we would have explored your involvement as tertiary education institutions in the functions of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. We hope also that we will strengthen tertiary education community's public participation in Scopa. So our intention is that although we're addressing you as students, but we're hoping that you'll also assist us in our discussion on how we can ensure that other role players in different faculties, particularly those that we are engaged with or that relate to our work, they are able to participate. We are hoping that we'll be able to propose possible involvement of Scopa in enhancing your development. So at the end, as I keep on presenting what I'm going to be saying, I'm hoping that you'll be making notes, particularly to suggest how you think that you can be actively involved in the work of Scopa. So in order for us to reach that discussion or that conclusion, we are going to be focusing on a number of issues. So I'll just bring you some introduction so that you can have a sense of what the legislature is about and its committees. Then we are going to also be talking about our planning and budget cycle. So because it's key to the work of Scopa. We'll also focus on the functions of Scopa, which is now specific, so that you can understand how it fits into the two areas that I would have done earlier. And then we will also, because the Office of the Auditor General of South Africa, AXA, is extremely important for our work, we'll have some focus on some of their reports. But at the end, that's when we'll ask you to make your suggestions or your comments on how you think you can be able to participate with us. I know that you are unable to talk to us directly, but you can be able to write your messages. What we suggest you do is that even after this session, you can still make your proposals or submissions, and we'll give you an email address where you can be able to send those comments. But please, as we keep on talking, please feel free to write your comments, because they are going to help us a lot in ensuring that we clarify this rule. So as I do this work, we will do this with one section. After that, I'll check if there are any questions on that section. Then we deal with them. Then we move to the next session, because it makes it easy in that way that we don't give you a lot of information and you are unable to provide us your feedback as quickly as possible. Now, to move in is that just to give you as part of our introduction, the Gauteng Provincial Legislature is one of the 9 provincial legislatures in South Africa. All of them are called provincial legislature, with the exception of the Western Cape. In the Western Cape, they've decided a route of having their own constitution, and therefore they are called the Western Cape Parliament. You will also know that we've got a national parliament, which consists of the National Assembly and also the National Council of Provinces. So Gauteng Provincial Legislature is one of the 9 provinces. It is one of the 3 arms of state. Let me just indicate that obviously we derive our work, or our work is derived from the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. There are also standing rules that have been adopted by the legislature. The requirement of legislation that legislatures, including Parliament, must adopt its own standing rules on how it's going to function as an institution and regulate all other things that happens within there. Obviously, a number of laws are applicable to our work, but just to indicate that we have, for the legislature to be able to function, it has established a number of committees. Some are called portfolio committees. The portfolio committees are linked to the executive. Now, by the executive, we mean, in the case of the province, we mean the premier and the 10 members of the executive council. They, in brief, we call them MECs, members of the executive council. So that because they are together with the premier, they form the executive of the province. At national, they are called a cabinet, led by the president. In the province, we call them the executive council, so they are members of the executive council. So for each member of the executive council and the departments that they oversee or they are running, there is a portfolio committee in the legislature. So because we've got 10 MECs, we therefore have 10 portfolio committees. In addition, there are some committees which are called standing committees. One of them, it is Scopa. That's why it's called the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Now, the rules of the legislature provides for the establishment and composition of its committees. This is really prescribed in the Rule 139. It explains things like the number of members who can be in the committee, but those numbers are determined proportionally depending on the outcomes of the election or the proportion of votes that each party received. Gauteng Provincial Legislature has got about 73 members, and then that is determined according to that. Generally, what then happens is that because you have to ensure that there's gender parity, all committees of the legislature have to ensure that that is taken care of. Women are fully represented accordingly. Now, just to give you a sense, is that the mandate of Gauteng Provincial Legislature is basically fourfold. This is determined, as I said earlier, by the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, but also internal arrangements through the standing rules. First is that because we are a legislature, we have to make laws. So lawmaking is our key mandate. But another key mandate is oversight. In other words, we do oversight on the executive. Portfolio committees and standing committees, I think in the case of the standing committees, there are two of them, which is the Oversight Committee on the Premier's Office, and the legislature, we abbreviate it as OCPOL. The other one is Scopa, the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. Those committees do oversight on the executive, the Premier and the MECs, and therefore the departments. And I'll go further in details later about that. Then, in addition, we are expected to, as the legislature, to promote cooperative governance. This is as per Chapter 3 of the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, which encourages the relation that they must have proper relations between ourselves as the provincial legislature and municipalities on the one hand, and also between ourselves and the National Assembly and the NCOP on the other hand. So there is that cooperation that must be there, and the intention is that it must be able to promote working together, but also in addition, it must be that we must support one another. So we do also, through cooperative governance, chapter 3 of the Constitution, ensure that we support municipalities as the province, and you'll see part of that later when I speak to you. But the most important thing also in this whole process is the mandate of public participation, which is the main reason why we engaging you tonight. Because public participation is one of the key things in which the legislature has prescribed that in our new democracy, we must make sure that every time we pass laws, before we can reach that stage, there's consultation with communities, with the public. And it means when all the committees of the legislature go through their reports, they must be able to have views from the communities. In fact, the legislature is a slogan that goes, your view is our vision. So it's very important, this thing of public participation. But you will know, and I think if you don't know, then you'll be able to know tonight, that public participation can only be made possible if people have information. Because without information, public participation can be handicapped. You can't expect people on the ground to be able to make comments if they don't even know who you are, what you are dealing with, and more specifically, if you are dealing with the report, what that report says. So it's important that we must be able to educate our committees about it. And that is why you'll see today, we're talking to you about the work of Scopa so that you understand what it does. In that way, we think that you'll be empowered to ensure that you participate in the work of Scopa in that regard. So we'll talk about some of these things later. For now, we're talking about the mandate of the legislature. Later, we'll be specific on the mandate of Scopa on how Scopa implement these 4 mandates in its work so that you can be able to understand it properly. Now, the reason why we're talking to you today, our understanding is that a number of you are students of public management studies. And so that is going to be part of the things that we explain. As we explain the legislation in its work, you'll be able to gain more specific issues around that. However, because you are Scopa, ours is more specifically on public financial management and accountability. And we'll see as we present. So our understanding is that we're hoping that you'll all benefit from this discussion on our work, and you'll be able to contribute in that regard. We know that's our view, and in fact, it was said by somebody that you as student, you're in the process of accumulating knowledge, which will apply in the future. However, we think that in our engagement tonight, you'll be able to see some of the things that you can work with Scopa so that you don't just apply it in the future, but be able also to do it currently. So, Chairperson, let me stop here and just hear some comments if there are any questions on the things we have said before we get to the next focus areas. The next focus area is going to be about planning and budget cycle. So you just want to be sure if there are no questions around the role of the legislature and the role that we think we expect that our participant today can play in the future. Obviously, we're still going to have suggestions as time goes on. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. There's only one question from Mr. David Kabwa. He says, hi, David Kabwa, a master's student in the Political Science Department at the University of Pretoria. What are the KPIs that the committee uses as a yardstick to measure progress and success? Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. As we present the role or the function of Scopa, you'll be able to understand what they are. So it's one of the topics that we'll be dealing with today or tonight, and then we'll be able to engage in that. But you will see as we talk about the role of Scopa in that regard. So please, if we do talk about the functions of Scopa and we're not covered, please remind us of your question again. But I'm confident that we'll be able to deal with that. Is there another question?
Thank you. Thank you. I think, Chairperson, there's a second question from Mr. Kabwa, but I think it's better if we proceed with the presentation, and we will respond to the questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lerato. Let me do as you instruct me. Thank you very much. I'll do so. Let me just go back to my presentation. So, what then, which is the next thing I want to talk to? Let me just show this like that. What then is the planning and budget cycle of Gauteng Provincial Legislature? We are using Gauteng Provincial Legislature. Most of what we're saying is applicable also to other legislatures and also to the National Assembly, although it could be at a varying level. But I think that if you understand what we're doing, because our focus is there, where when you want to go and check with other institutions or other parliament, other provincial legislature, you'll be able to get that. So generally, we are at the beginning of each term, just after elections. It's a 5-year term. Government in general, whether it's province or national, even at municipal level, they're expected to unveil their 5-year strategic plan. And that strategic plan in Gauteng currently is called Growing Gauteng Together 2030. It is an ambitious plan by Gauteng provincial government to say in the next 5 years, well, now it's no longer, it's going to be 2.5 years by November. What exactly are we intending to achieve? And out of that, each department then develop its own strategic plan. And what then happens when that has been, those plans are supposed to be engaged with the different committees of the legislature, so that remember, the legislature is a parliament of the people. Those who are elected, who are called members of the provincial legislature, MPLs, because those that are at National Assembly, they are called members of parliament, MPs. We are called members of provincial legislature, MPL. So we as MPLs, we represent the people. So it's important that the strategic plans that are outlined, we must look at them and inspect them and see if they will really achieve the goals or the mandate that has been given to us by the voters at the time of voting. So that's how you engage. Obviously, what prevails is what the governing party, the majority party, has in its own manifesto. But there's always engagement on a number of things. Departments are subsequently expected to then outline this strategic plan on an annual basis, which is called the annual performance plans, the APPs. So they must be able to then come back to the legislature and say, we as the Department of Education, in order for us to implement this strategic plan, this is the annual performance plan we are having for the current financial year. These are the targets you are going to be achieving. These are the programs you are going to engage with, and all that. What then happens is that when that program is tabled in the legislature, it must then be engaged with the stakeholders. It's important to understand that our financial year starts on the 1st of April to the 31st of March. This is now government. Those of you who have interest in municipality, at the municipal level, the financial year is the 1st of July up to the 30th of June. But national and provincial government is the 1st of April up to the 31st of March. So we are expected as committees that we must be able to approve these annual performance plans so that we can use them to assess progress that is being made in that regard by the various departments. So what they do then on a quarterly basis, they present to the legislature and therefore the various committees of the legislature their quarterly performance reports. And those quarterly performance reports are assessed on the basis of what they say they're going to do through the annual performance plans. And what then happened at the end of the year, we must also be able to assess what they have done. And normally they produce what they call the annual reports. The annual reports, amongst others, have got an assessment of the annual performance plans. But those, as you'll see later, they also include financial performance or financial statements. And those are then audited by the Auditor General of South Africa, but we'll come back to that discussion. So this is the kind of planning that is there on the budget cycle, and then obviously we have to assess that. Part of that plan is that when we know what their APPs are and all, then there must be budget votes. I mean, there must be an allocated budget. An appropriation bill must be passed. And through this appropriation bill, the appropriation bill explained for each department what amounts are set aside, and we call them votes. So for Gauteng Provincial Legislature, there are 15 votes. Vote 1 is the office of the Premier. Vote 2 is the provincial legislature. Then the other 10 departments have got it's vote 3 up to vote 15. Some of the votes, let me just indicate, some of the departments have got more than one vote. So as an example, there's the MEC for Human Settlement and Cockner, on MEC Maile. He's responsible for 2 votes. One vote is human settlement, so it's got its own vote number. The other one is COCTA, which is Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs. So that's what it is. So is the case with MEC Tau, who is responsible for economic development and agriculture and rural affairs. That is divided into 2. There's one vote which is economic development. There's another vote which is agriculture and rural development. So there are some MECs who've got more than one vote. That's why you see between vote 3 and 15, instead of them being 10, they are more than 10. It's within that context. What then happens that Gauteng provincial government have got entities like Gautrain as an entity, Maroping, there's Cradle of Humankind, the Liquor Board. So there are a number of these entities that they have, but what they do, those entities are not allocated funds on the votes or directly from the appropriation bill, but they get it through the department. So if vote that has to do with economic development, we allocate the money. Then they must ensure that the entities under them, they are able to allocate them the necessary funds. One of the things that is important is that when they've received the fund, they must spend that money. And in the process of spending, they are governed by the legislation. There's PFMA, the Public Finance Management Act, in the case of the provincial government, and that is also applicable to the national government, the Public Finance Management Act. However, for municipalities, there is a Municipal Finance Management Act. And then in that regard, what it regulates is, amongst others, how they must be able to spend. And there are a lot of things that it says, but I wanted to focus on spending for purposes of our discussion. So in the way they spend, what we have discovered is that there are these 3 things that they must prevent. So they must have plans to prevent them from happening. One is unauthorized expenditure, where if we allocate the budget, remember I said the budget of the legislature is approved. I mean, the budget of government is approved by the legislature. So when we approve for votes, in each vote, you'll find that there are sub-votes. When we approve an amount, that this is the allocation for the year, they can't spend more than that. If they do spend, it becomes an unauthorized expenditure. We have experienced one recently, because over years, there hasn't been much unauthorized expenditure in Gauteng. However, the only one we did experience, which was about 2 years ago, was in the office of the Premier, related to payments that had to be done for victims on families of life esidimeni. What had happened in that case is that the Deputy Chief Justice Mosineke, who investigated and came up with the report, made a determination at the end that the victims must be paid within a particular period. That period was within the time when the budget that was passed before was supposed to be allocated. So in other words, it wasn't going to happen the following financial year. This then meant the Office of the Premier had to pay them with money that was not allocated. So it became an over expenditure. And there's a way in which we deal with those, and I'll explain later how do we correct that. But we don't know, they must avoid. So as I said, there hasn't been any for more than 4 or 5 years now in the legislature. There's also fruitless and wasteful expenditure, which they must prevent from happening. Obviously, this is more about the expenditure which was made in vain and would have been avoided as reasonable care been exercised. What we experience mainly is that you find departments have got legal fees or some fees that they must pay and they delay. And in their delaying, then there's interest, and that interest becomes a fruitless and wasteful expenditure, because if they didn't delay, they wouldn't have had to pay those. So those are some of the examples that we experience. What we have seen in the Gauteng provincial legislature is fruitless and wasteful expenditure goes to millions. But you'll see it's not a lot compared to irregular expenditure. And I want to move straight to irregular expenditure to say that that is one of the biggest problems we have currently, to try and get departments to reduce or to prevent irregular expenditure. So this is expenditure they do in contravention of the PFMA or any other legislation, sometimes the Treasury Regulations, and because they bypass tender processes or procurement processes, or they do work in such a way that when they are supposed to, as an example, you find an instance that they must ensure that any procurement or any service that must be procured, which is more than 500,000 rand, that must go on tender. So some of them don't go on tender, or if they go on tender, they bypass the process. But some of them, what they do, they break down a 1.5 million project into 3 so that they don't go on tender. And that sometimes that is not justifiable, then there's a problem. So those are some of the examples. The difference is that with irregular expenditure, in most cases, we find that there was a service delivered. The problem, it was not delivered properly. It was, so action must be taken to correct that, and I'll come back to that later. With the new what is called Public Audit Amendment Act, which is mainly governing the work of the Auditor General, the original act is called the Public Audit Act. There was an amendment to that legislation to include, amongst others, the issues of empowering the Auditor General to deal with something that we call material irregularity. Now, remember earlier I talked about irregular expenditure. The difference between the two is that when it comes to material regularity, what is clear is that like irregular expenditure, there's non-compliance with or contravention of legislation. But also there's fraud, there could be fraud or theft or any breach of fiduciary duties. But in addition, material regularity says, then we must also, the auditor must determine that whatever that action was would have resulted or is likely to result in a material financial loss, the misuse or loss of a material public resource, or substantial harm to a public sector, institution, or general public. So if you understand it, so with material financial loss, it means with the irregular expenditure, the activity could have happened, the service could have been secured, but you might find that if you investigate, there wouldn't have been any material financial loss. So that's a bit different, the difference between the two. And there are processes that the Auditor General has to follow in ensuring that these matters of material irregularities are followed up to the end. Now, I just want to say that the reason I've raised all what I've said to you now is that you must understand that first, you as members of public, before I talk to you as students, first you as members of the public, you've got a right to comment on the strategic plans of government. You've got a right, once I said to you, it comes to us as representatives of the people. But before we can determine if those strategic plans are proper and they can meet the requirements, the legislature requires us to get the views of the public or their comments on those strategic plans. So if you look at the process of the legislature, we are required that when we consider the annual performance plans of the legislature itself, Office of the Premier and the department, we need to ensure that the public has commented. In the process, when we have to process the unauthorized expenditure, let me just explain, this is what I said I'll explain. When the unauthorized expenditure, remember I made an example about life asset main expenditure and also the premium. When unauthorized expenditure happens, then there must be an investigation so that you can determine whether what caused the unauthorized expenditure. Is it a genuine cause or it was it was not properly done? So we have to look at all those things. So this has to go to Scopa. Scopa, on behalf of the legislature, investigate, and amongst others, needs to get the community's views or public's views on that particular expenditure. And in that regard, when they're satisfied, then they can determine whether that expenditure was justified or not. In the case where we find that was justified, we then pass a bill called the Unauthorized Expenditure Bill, and if the legislature accepts it, becomes an act. So through that, we can determine that the money that was overspent, must then be reallocated in the next financial year. But if we find that it was the reasons were not justified, we could take a decision that the refund of that money mustn't be done by the next allocation. The department must find its own ways internally to rework its budget to then be able to fund that. So those are things I thought I should be able to. So when we do that, we need community participation. And we're hoping that you as students, because this language I'm talking now, it's easier understood than the ordinary people on the street. Some of these things is difficult for them to comment on. We're hoping that people like yourself can be helpful in this regard. Obviously, even during quarterly reports, I've said that we like your comments, but also when we do check if this unauthorized, this irregular expenditure or this fruitless and wasteful expenditure was done properly with this investigation, we need to also verify some of the things. If they say to us they did build a hall, but we look at the system, we think that there's a problem, we must go and verify with the communities. Then the communities can tell us, yes, there was a hall built, then you can be able to look at it. So those are some of the things. Chair, let me stop here and see if there are any questions that we can take before we move to the next section, which is about the question that was asked earlier about the function of Scopa. Because currently I was just talking about the legislature and the planning cycle. We are now going to zoom into Scopa itself after this.
Thank you, Chair. We have some few questions. The first question is from David again. He says, what is the level of flexibility employed when engaging stakeholders that are totally unfamiliar with the relevance of the work that the committee does? ignorance breeds misunderstanding, which results in conflict. I've witnessed instances of angry stakeholders that struggle to grasp the context of the engagement because they were unable to follow the initial overview. Thank you.
Is there another one, or it's the only one?
Yes, we do have another one. It's also from David. It says, all of autonomy in their financial mandate, to what extent? There's another question from
Just repeat that. I'm not sure what is being asked.
he just made it short to say all of autonomy in their financial mandate, to what extent? Then he left it like that. And then there's another question from Ashlyn Plakis. Sorry, I missed the distinction between MPLs and MOPs. If it can just be repeated, please. Another question, again from David. New institutions of higher learning are more dependent on subsidies for the OPEX budget. The University of Mpumalanga and Sol Plaatje University depended on government grants, the most in 2019, according to Stats SA. The report indicated that this is at a national level. Does Scopa play a role in assisting the process at provincial level? Another question.
Okay, maybe let's take those so that if there's more, then we can be able to respond to them accordingly.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
We list them. Yeah, let me just start by saying that on the flexibility that was asked earlier, that is the reason why we are having this session. You are correct, because whenever we go to communities and ask them to comment on the reports before Scopa, sometimes you find that they'll use the platform to complain about government. But that's not the intention. You are there. The intention, you are there to find out about issues that are relevant. So that is why it is our public participation is two-pronged. First is that we must give as much information as we can to those that we expect to comment, but it must be as simple as possible, and it must be understood. And then secondly, then you must expect them to comment. Like I think there's one comment that is made earlier about the grants to universities. When it started, I was worried that it's not about what we are discussing, but I realized later that it's talking about the Scopa group, but I'll come back to that. So yes, some of the committees outside of Scopa, for instance, you find the Community Safety Portfolio Committee would go into the community to talk about, give the report about what the police are doing and around there. Then you find some people who stand up genuinely and raise complaints about the police, which are relevant. That complaint is relevant to that committee. But somebody will stand up and say, no, we don't have houses here. So that is the problem that we encounter. That's why our public participation process is not just to go and ask people what are you commenting. We must find ways of education. That's this session that we're having now. We're hoping that when you understand the role of Scopa, you'll be able to then participate, and you'll see some of the things we are going to talk about later. I didn't understand the question about autonomy. I'm hoping that maybe he can rewrite it so that it's clearer. But on the MPLs, what I think we didn't say MOPs, but what we said is that at National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces, if put together, they are called Parliament. It's the Parliament of South Africa. Those members serving there are MPs, members of Parliament, MPs. Then we here in the provinces, because we're serving in the provincial legislature, We are called MPLs, members of provincial legislature. Councillors in municipalities, they are called exactly that, councillors. So I think that clarifies that. Okay, yes, when it comes to grants to universities, Scopa would not necessarily get involved in who gets allocation and everything. Scopa comes in, and you'll see later, when one, the suspected corrupt activities that have happened in the process. Two, depending on the report of the Auditor General and investigations that were there, we need to verify some of the information and be able to intervene. So that would be the role of Scopa when it comes to that. Thank you, Lerato. I'm not sure if there are, how many other questions are there?
Thank you, Chairperson. Yes. Let me go check them again because they are coming a lot. Okay, after the difference
Let's do
between
this. Let's take 3 for now, then we'll come
Yes.
back to the others. Okay.
Okay. Here comes the first one. It's from Ashley. If resources are properly allocated in the budget, if accurate figures exist within the budget and these allocations are adhered to, I believe that irregular use of funds can be avoided or minimized. The second one is from Non-Togozo, Natasha Sbande. What measures do we have in place to ensure that all of these misconducts are avoided? The third one is from Sean Malema. How does one become part of Scopa, and is it all of South Africa or some parts of it? Let's respond to this one, then we'll come back to the other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, what we'll do is that we'll respond to these 3. We'll go on with the presentation. Maybe we could check the rest. Then we'll come back to some of those questions. Maybe because the fear is that some of them are already touching on what we're still going to be covering. But just briefly, I think the one about resource allocation was a comment, so I'm not going to respond to it. But just to say, yes, it is true. If we manage resource allocation properly, we can avoid all these irregular expenditure, you name them. If you talk about measures to avoid misconduct, you'll see as we continue with the presentation that there are processes that Scopa goes through to check if there is, and then make some interventions. Already I've said to you, through the Auditor General's office, there's a process that the Auditor General deals with when it comes to what they normally call them MIs. These are material irregularities. The process is that if the AG is convinced that this is going to result in material loss and all those things that I mentioned, then they give an instruction to the accounting officer to set up plans to investigate and correct that. If they don't do that, there's another step that is intervention by the AG. Then they now involve the executive authorities. When I say executive authority, I mean the political heads, who are either the premier, the speaker, or the member of the executive committee or executive council, the MEC in our case. So they involve them. Those are called executive authorities. So executive authorities get involved to then ensure that things happen or those matters are resolved. But if they are not, then the next step is that the matter must then be reported to the relevant law enforcement agencies. And the Auditor General may then also issue what is called the certificate of debt. It means when the accounting office didn't do the work properly to investigate what went wrong, and there's clarity, it's clear that there's financial loss, it must be determined what is the financial loss. If it's 3 million, then the certificate of debt is issued to the accounting office to say, because you didn't do this, so you are liable to pay the 3 million that you're talking about. So there's that. So it's to come and get the money from them. However, the legislation itself, the PFMA, clarifies that in the case where you are unable to prevent unauthorized expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and the irregular expenditure, there must be first it must be reported. In other words, you must reflect it in your books. You must also report it to the Treasury, and in some cases, you must report it to the Internal Audit Committee. But if it so happens that you didn't do, you've done that, then you must set up another process, which is to investigate what went wrong. And in your investigation, you must then determine what went wrong. So there could be various things. It could be that it's not really a problem of deliberate bypassing of legislation or the laws that are there or regulations, but it's just incapacity. So people don't know how to do these things. So what then you need to put up or do what we call consequence management. It means then you must be able to train those people to be able to do the work that they are required. Sometimes you might find the problem is not the person, it's the system. So it means then the accounting officer must correct the system and show that it is done properly. However, there are times when it is fraud, it is deliberate and all that. So in that case, those who are found guilty, the consequence management requires that that money must be recouped so that those people must pay back whatever the financial loss is. And sometimes it could also mean that they must be charged or be arrested. I should have indicated the Scopa membership. Like I said earlier, Scopa is members of the legislature in our case, and the national is members of parliament. So it's not members of the public. And Scopa, in our case, like I indicated, is the political parties that are there. However, because in the new dispensation in South Africa, democracy means public participation as well. There's two levels. Level one, I've got a responsibility as the member of the legislature to ensure that I represent the interests of those that voted me, or in this case, as it is in South Africa, who voted my party. That's the first thing. But the second is that in the process of committees doing their work, they must get the views of the communities. So that's how well, you are not, I can't say you are a member of Scopa, but in that way you are able to contribute. It's not only in Scopa, it's all other committees as well. Thank you, Lerato. I hope I've dealt with the three. Let's go on with the presentation on the other things, and then we'll come back to all other questions so that you can be able to cover time as well. Would that be acceptable with you, Lerato?
It's fine, Chairperson. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share the screen again. So now we are coming specifically to Scopa. So Scopa, as a committee, this is the mandate of, this is the function of Scopa. So Scopa has a responsibility to examine the financial statements of the legislature, which is in this case Gauteng Provincial Legislature, as headed by the Speaker. And in Gauteng Provincial Legislature, the Speaker currently is Honorable Ntombi Mekgwe. Scopa also has to examine the financial statements of all departments of Gauteng Provincial Legislature, provincial government, sorry. You remember I spoke to you about the 14 votes at the beginning. And I say 14 because it includes the vote of the Office of the Premier. And then Scopa has to examine the financial statements of the entities of the Gauteng Provincial Government. There are 19 entities, and I've given examples of some of them earlier. In addition, Scopa has to examine any audit report issued on those statements. In the way that the departments work is that they've got what they call their own internal audit units. But those are internal, they're audit. But then in addition, there's an independent audit committee. In Gauteng, and is provided by PFMA is that instead of each department having its own audit committee, audit committees are responsible for a cluster of departments. So you'll find an audit committee that is responsible for 3 or 4 departments. That is allowed by the law. So they produce reports, and those reports Scopa can be able to examine them. But also the Office of the Auditor General, and I'm going to come back later to the Auditor General, has to ensure also that they look at the affairs of all these departments and produce reports. And they can also, so they do that on an annual basis. According to the Public Finance Management Act, which is what frustrates most of the public representatives or members of parliament, members of provincial legislature, is that by the time the financial year ends, which is the 31st of March, to the time, let me say from the time the financial year ends to the time when these reports come to the legislature, it's 6 months. Because within 2 months of the end of the financial year, the departments must produce the reports, both financial reports, performance reports, and then submit those for auditing. So it's March, so it's end of May. By end of May, they should have done so. Then the audit kicks in. The Office of the Auditor General comes in and then audit that. And they've got another 2 months or so to do that. And then they must be able then to then come back in the process they engage the various officials and everything. By the time they have to finalize the report, the legislation says it must be 6. So the report must be tabled in the legislature. Okay, let me just start here. The report must have gone back to the auditees, in other words, departments, within 5 months of that period. And then after that, within a month, they should have submitted that. Now the auditees, the departments, must have tabled their reports in the legislature. So that takes 6 months. And sometimes it becomes a problem because when you engage that report, it's a report that some people would argue it's stale. That's why there's an argument that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, Scopa, does its work ex post facto. So they call it an ex post facto, ex post oversight. But we'll come back to that discussion later. But I thought I should just explain that so that you can understand. Now, the Auditor General can also produce, the Scopa can examine any other financial statement or reports referred to the committee by the House. But before I come that, with the passing of the budget on COVID-19, the funds that were provided for COVID-19, alleviation of problems of health and social issues, the Auditor General was empowered by the President to do what they call real-time audit. So instead of waiting for the end of the financial year, they went in. So they've now produced 3 reports. One report was for the period up to the end of June last year. It's the first special report which focused on the national and provincial spending. 2, there's a second special report which was produced for the period ending September last year, which is also from national and province. So it's called second special report on COVID, on management of COVID funds, on management of COVID funds that were allocated by the government. Then there's a third one that was issued that one relates to municipal spending. So these reports, Scopa has to process them as well in that regard. And also that Scopa, when we have done that, you must then report to the House on these things that we have done, but also we can initiate investigation. So as an example, what we did as Scopa, in the current term, we started in 2019, May. We then resolved that we want to assess what the previous term's approach to unauthorized, irregular fruitless and wasteful expenditure was. So in that regard, what we did is that we then went and investigated the 5-year term. We wanted to use that report to assess and see where the problems are so that you can see what we must look for in the current term. So we've got the right to do that. You yourselves, if you see any matters of irregularity or corruption or mismanagement of funds, you can come to Scopa and report what you see, and then we can initiate investigation in that regard. So that's that's what we are doing as Scopa in that regard. Let me also say that on the mandate of Scopa, so as I said, the main thing is about enhancing financial management standards by ensuring that public sector institutions remain within their budget and spend according to the purposes determined by the legislature, so that they don't do unauthorized expenditure, amongst others. They are held accountable if they do not comply with the law and regulations concerning their financial management, so they must come to Scopa and account. They provide value for money in the services provided to the public and the state, and develop and implement the necessary financial management capability and good governance practice. Because when the Auditor General does the audit, they normally don't check issues that have to do that. What was the impact on service delivery? Although I'm going to talk to you later about one audit they do, but I'll explain how it differs. Because they don't do that, it's our responsibility as Scopa to go further than what the Auditor General has found, so that you can be able to be satisfied that there was value for money that was done in that regard. And then we just want also to indicate that on the mandate of Scopa, the functions of accountability include, amongst others, because it's about financial accountability. It includes to enhance the integrity of public governance in order to safeguard government against corruption, nepotism, abuse of power, and other forms of inappropriate behavior. As an institutional arrangement to effect democratic control, that's what accountability is about. Accountability also is about improvement in performance, which will foster institutional learning and service delivery. Also, it is about, particularly as it regards to transparency, responsiveness, and answerability, is about ensuring that public confidence in government and bridge the gap between government, the governed and the government of the day. So that's what these public financial management issues have to do on the functions of Scopa. So what is important then, which is remember when we started, we told you that there's a mandate of the legislature, which was lawmaking, public participation, cooperative governance, and we said it's lawmaking, oversight, public participation, and cooperative governance. So that's what the mandate is. Now that mandate is not, it must be undertaken by all its committees. So the committee of the legislature must ensure that is there. So how does this apply to Scopa? How does Scopa do all those things? So on lawmaking, I've already explained how we deal with issues of processing the unauthorized bill. So and in doing so, it's Scopa that advises the legislature whether this was properly done, the unauthorized expenditure was justified or not, and if not, what happens and all that. Secondly, we do oversight, and we are guided by the Public Finance Management Act. So we've got the responsibility to ensure that the Public Financial Management Act is applied. But also the legislature itself is governed by another. So Public Finance Management Act doesn't govern the legislature or parliament. Those two are governed by a separate act, which is called the Financial Management of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures Act. But also, as part of oversight, we must look at the reports of the Auditor General of South Africa. So the Auditor General of South Africa produces reports, and when we look at those reports, these are reports about what the performance of the department, both, and I'll come back to the details of what it contains, but it's guided by the Public Audit Act and the Public Amendment Audit Act, and I've explained this earlier, and I've said that we've dealt with a special report on COVID-19. There's also Treasury Regulations that that are proclaimed, which determine how the departments must do some, particularly procurement and all those kind of things. Those of you who follow some of the problems with COVID-19 funds is that the Treasury tried to intervene by saying that given the problems or the extent of the problem, it's better to ease some of or to shorten some of the process. But then it became a problem. People found a loophole and they started doing other things. So it had to be reversed. But also we are governed by the standing rules, and I've said that. So we do oversight governed by the standing rules of the legislature. So what we do on cooperative governance, we support what are called municipal public accounts committees. So as Scopa in Gauteng, we have a relationship with other municipal public accounts committees in Gauteng. There are all in all about 13 of them. It's the 3 metros, Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, and Tshwane. Then in Sidibeng, there's the district of Sidibeng. Then there are 3 local municipalities with Midvaal, Mfuleni, and it's Midvaal, Mfuleni, and Lisedi. Then in the West Rand, there is the Western District itself and the three local municipalities, which are the Rand West, Merafong, and Mohale City. So we support those public accounts committees. We don't do oversight as Scopa on the finances of municipalities, but we do support public accounts committees so they're empowered to ensure that they strengthen their oversight at that level. We also, as the facilitator explained earlier, we've got a structure where we work with other legislatures. It's called the Association of Public Accounts Committees, Apec, and currently we are the general secretary of the structure. So in that way, we share best practice with other legislatures at the National Assembly. I think some of you would know that there's the chairperson of Scopa at National Assembly is a very popular guy. His name is Honorable Hlema, and I'm hoping that most of you know him. So Honorable Hlema is the chairperson there. I'm the chairperson in Gauteng, and there are various chairpersons and all other ones. But also the other thing we have to do is public participation. This is key for our discussion today. You as members of the public, you see, I'm referring to you as members of the public for now, and I know that you are students, but for now I'm referring to you as members of the public because you've got a right to participate in our work. So the rules of the legislature, even the constitution of the country says we can't bar you from coming except if we are discussing in committee and they must get permission for that. So it means you have the right to be part of our meetings. When I say part, to come and watch what we do, listen to our meetings, attend our meetings, both of the legislature and the committees. And the legislature has made it simple because it's taking public participation seriously. Because of COVID, we are no longer sitting at the legislature. Because in the past, what we would do is that when we have meetings, sometimes we'll have them at the legislature, then we'll transport stakeholders who are interested to come to the legislature, or sometimes we'd go have them in various stages. Sometimes you could come to, if there was no COVID, you would come to one of the institutions to hold Scopa meetings so that you can observe how we do our work. Maybe it's something that as part of public participation we can suggest later. And as we do that, you can be able then to see it. But we used to do it in community halls and all that. And the problem that you experience is the one that one question related to. Because as we speak, some people don't even understand what we're saying because of if I say to the members of the community, particularly in townships, I speak about unauthorized expenditure, they don't understand what I'm saying. But that's why this education that is important. So you've got a right to attend our meetings. So the legislature has now made it possible that people can attend virtually. So if you want to attend our meetings, you can talk to Lerato, who's coordinated this. And then what she can do is that she can register you because we understand that our people don't have they've got lots of problems with data. That's why the legislature has allowed that they've got something called reverse billing. So you register, when you attend our meetings, they don't charge your data. It's the legislature charge the data. So that's what it happens. You can also make comments on our reports. I mean, let's make an example. Let me make an example that's relevant to you. If the Department of Higher Education, and remember, higher education is not the response or the competence of Gauteng Provincial Legislature, is the national competency. So I'm making this because I want you to understand it's not what you are dealing with in Gauteng. It's dealt with national. If the national department, the Department of Higher Education's report are out, and the committee there is considering them, you've got a right to comment on those reports. In fact, even in our province, you can do so. If, for instance, there's a report by community safety, amongst others, it covers issues of gender, of sexual abuse and those kind of things, and you've got an interest in that, you can be able to comment in that report. But here, because we're talking Scopa, it's more about issues of financial management and accountability. We expect you to comment. Let's go to questions and let's see what happens. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you, Chair. There's a question from Lucia. I will read it the way she wrote it. She says, "Good evening. Will you please repeat the part in which who is the certificate of death for the financial loss and held liable to repay the misused money if the investigation was not satisfactory?" I think what she's trying to say is that in a situation of death, during the investigation for the financial loss, who is held liable to repay the misused money? That's the first question. There's a second question from Sean asking what is the function of Scopa in the construction industry, if there is a relationship between the committee and the construction industry. Another question from Lucia, the third question. What are the plans and processes that are in place in order to ensure that there is little to unauthorized expenditure? Secondly, if a department is found on a regular basis to have unauthorized expenditure, what measures are then taken? Another fourth question, it's from Ntabiseng, Gratitude Causa. Good evening. How will the communities know about the development of the 5-year strategic plan so they can actively participate in the process? Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just say that on the misuse of money, I was trying to write it, but I hope I got it right. Obviously, as I said earlier, the first thing that is important is that if money has been misused, there must be an investigation, because you can't just say money has been misused. You must investigate to determine what went wrong and who is wrong. Now, yes, it can happen that by the time they discover the person has passed on, there's very little that we can do in the case where the person has passed on, but there is an instant, or there are instances where people decide that they are being investigated, then they leave the department. In fact, last week on Thursday, the Premier came to address Scopa about the investigations that have been happening in the department. That question was asked to the Premier, and his response was that, yes, if you look at it, there are people who decide that, hey, I'm being investigated, let me leave and then they go to another department or things, or another government institution, or another level of government. In Gauteng, the Premier's office has set up a process where when you are found guilty and you are no longer in the employ of government, they trace you. If you are employed by another government institution, then they write a report and inform that government so they can continue, either take you on those, or they must bring you back for you to be accountable. However, if you are not in another government, they've got a right to follow up through the law enforcement agencies, where the SIU, you name them, and all that, the SAPS. On the construction industry, remember, what you must remember is that Scopa gets involved where there's been financial mismanagement. So not on the problem that there's a construction people, the houses are not built, unless it is claimed that monies were paid for those houses, but there are no houses. Then it's a corruption. That's where Scopa comes in. But if it's just a generally of underperformance by a construction company and all that, those are matters that are dealt with a different portfolio committee. So we get involved in all the spheres, in all departments, only on matters that have to do with financial mismanagement and inability to account for those funds. That's where we come in. And then on the issues, excuse me, I'm sorry about on issues of unexpenditure, what are the plans, unauthorized expenditure, what are the plans to prevent? I told you, I think I've raised this question, this remark earlier. It is the responsibility of the accounting officer. In the case of government accounting officer, also the Premier is the DG. In the departments, it's the HOD, and in the legislature is the secretary to the legislature. So accounting officers have a responsibility to set up plans. Obviously, what they do, they work with their chief financial officers, they set up the system, but at the end, the person who's accountable is the accounting officer. So they must make sure that those plans are there. That's why they went through school like yourselves. They are able to understand how to interpret legislation, how to put up plans, how to prevent things. They must be able to set up those. And those plans must then be approved by their head of the institution or of the department, which a political head, which is the MEC or the Premier or the Speaker. So those systems are there. So the problem is that if those plans don't work, they must change and make them work. Obviously, if there's a problem later, we find that those things are not working. We as Scopa, because the Auditor General has a responsibility to determine that. Then based on the Auditor General's report, we're able to engage the department and ask them, why are not plans working? What did you do? What give us other plans in which we are going to intervene in it. So those are some of the measures that are taken to ensure that those plans do work. Yes, on the development of the 5-year strategy, that's why it's our responsibility as the legislature now to make sure, first of all, government, in other words, the Premier and the MECs have got a responsibility to take that 5-year strategy and engage various stakeholders. So when the current Growing Gauteng Together 2030 was to be adopted, the Premier and the MECs met a number of stakeholders. By the time they came to the legislature to present it, they told us that they'd met a number of stakeholders. And as a result of that, we ourselves then had to take those and consult further to hear because sometimes you might find that they are unable to reach everybody else. So we are called the representatives of the people. So we've got the responsibility to go to the ordinary people in the street and make them come. So the important thing is what you keep on saying. You don't expect people to comment on something that they don't know. So you have a responsibility to educate them, to tell them what it is, so they can be able to make the necessary necessary intervention. So yes, that's the plan. Obviously, it's no longer a 5-year strategic plan now. There are annual performance plans that are produced. So we have the responsibility to make sure that we go to the committees, let them understand these are the plans, and let them be able to indicate to us what they can do. Let me give you a practical example on how you can help us in that regard. And it relates to the question that was asked earlier. We are expected that every year, departments must come with plans to prevent unauthorized expenditure, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and irregular expenditure. Those plans must be tested. And we think that people like yourselves, because particularly those who are doing public financial management, they can be able to assist us as Scopa to say, no, but we think these systems that are there are not in compliance with some of the things that we've studied and all that. We think these are the weaknesses, and you make those comments in our committee. Thank you, Chair. I thought I should be able to respond like that. Thank you. Those are the response to the 4 questions. Do you want me to go on and do the last presentation so that when you take the questions, we can be able to take all the questions so that we can be able to cover our time?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We can proceed. We don't have more questions for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Let me put back our presentation. If I'm correct, we're supposed to be done in about 30 minutes. Am I correct?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me try and move so that we can be able to take more questions where there are any. Now, this is one of the important parts, and it's one of the last parts I want to raise with you. If the Auditor General is the most strategic partner for us as Scopa, because they conduct external audit and compile reports on the financial statements of departments and entities. Why you say external audit? Because the Auditor General's office is not inside the departments. You remember I said to you in the departments there's internal audit. Then I said also there are audit committees, which are people who are appointed according, if you go to Section 77 of the Public Financial Management Act, it explains about the audit committees. It will be able then to say that these are people who are not employed by the department or by government, but they are independent people that they get. But then the Auditor General has a responsibility then to audit everything. And that these reports by the AG are what helps us a lot, because it's audited, it's information we have there. So that's why our relationship with the Auditor General is extremely important. In fact, the Auditor General defines their office as the enablers of oversight. In other words, they enable us as oversight body to be able to do oversight accordingly. The components of the report of the AXA are as follows. If you look at the Auditor General's report, it's divided into various sections. One section is about the report on audit of financial statements. So they give you an opinion, whether it's unqualified with no finding, and we'll normally call it a clean audit. Then there's unqualified with findings, there's qualified with findings. So normally the first two are preferred, although the second one, which is unqualified with findings, still has because there are problems that must be resolved there, and I'll show you some of them. So it's important, we want them to be unqualified. And I can tell you now that since we started our work, and I'm told even before, the Office of the Premier always received an unqualified audit finding. But when it's unqualified with findings, it means that there are some few things, they are not material. That's why it's called unqualified with findings. They're not material, so but they must still be attended to. Then there are issues that there's an opinion that is called qualified with findings. There that means there's a problem, and the Auditor General explains what those issues are. Just hold on, I'm still having a problem here. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that, Lerato and colleagues. I hope you can still hear me.
Yes, Chair, we can hear you.
Okay, so I was saying that, and you can still see the presentation?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, so and then what happens is that there's these adverse and disclaimers. There's a problem. If it adverse, it means there's a big problem, and we normally before that, yeah. So there's a problem, but disclaimer, it means they can't find records. There's a problem, and we've had such experiences. I mean. And we are worried about Scopa when that happens, because there could be two possibilities. There's such a lot of corruption that people are hiding information from the AG. And that's why we have interest when that happens. So that's the first part of the Auditor General's report. The second part, which, let me say, still on the audit of financial statement, then the Auditor General, after the opinion, then gives us what are the matters of emphasis. Normally, when it's the unqualified with no findings, you won't find these matters. But if it's unqualified with findings, so there are few things. Normally, these are the things we come across, which includes either issues like underspending of the annual approach. So, because when we give you money, you must spend it. If you underspend, is a problem. So that can be an audit query. It's issues around irregular expenditure, it's issues of litigation, particularly, and most importantly, or most of these are prevalent in the health department. Remember, people go, if they're not treated properly, or there's a problem, the baby died, also they take them to court and all that. So those are some of the things that we see. Then there's also the report. So the audit, the report of the AG also focuses on the report on the audit of the annual performance plan. Now, if you look at what it is, it's about performance. What the Auditor General does is that of all the targets or programs or projects that the department has said that they're going to do, remember, they then sample some, they take some, and check if, one, the targets were met, two, if they were met. Sometimes you find that they didn't meet all the targets. They've got 15 targets, they met 8. What were the reasons and all that? So the Auditor General makes a determination in that regard. The other thing that the Auditor General reports on is that they report on the compliance with legislation. Remember, I said the Public Finance Management Act, for departments and government, but for the legislature is the FAMPLA, which is the Financial Management of Parliament and Provincial Legislatures. There's also the compliance with the legislation, the Treasury Regulations, and all other legislation that is there. Sometimes when there's allocated funds to the department, it's allocated under certain legislation, but if they don't comply with it, then it's that legislation. So what we have found is that the problems that the Auditor General finds are that sometimes the annual financial statements are not properly produced. So they are not completed, or they are not done properly. And in that case, which is something that is not that much, it is prevalent in provincial government, but when the Auditor General audits and brings to their attention, they correct it. But in municipalities, it's worse, because we told that some of them even go to the extent of getting the consultant to come and do that for them at a cost of about 10 million. I'm told they go at an average of 10 million to assist them with this. But still, you find the Auditor General find that those reports are not proper, and then they get qualified. The big issue is there's a difference between audit. Well, it might not be a big difference, but the applicable legislation when it comes to auditing a company and auditing public institution, there are a number of things that you must take care of, and those are some of the things. It's also on issues of expenditure management. We've spoken about them, the UI, we call them UIF and W. It means unauthorized, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. There are issues of procurement and what happens with contract management, tenders, corruption in that level. There are issues that have to do with investigations done, but there was nothing done to follow up on what the investigation found. So there was no consequence management. And those are so fine, because the legislation, remember somebody asked the question, If you find UIF and W, what then are you expected to do? Is there something you can do to correct? So the legislation says this is what you must do. If you don't do it, it's called consequence management. But if you don't do consequence management, it's an audit finding. Obviously, there's other information that the Auditor General reports on, particularly like what happens is that the Auditor General audits the financial statements of the department. But that report, remember I said to you that report that I said it takes about 6 months? That report has got the section that has got to do with annual financial statements, but it also gives performance reports on issues of human resource, on issues of projects they've implemented. There are a number of things. In that regard, the Auditor General also has to look at that information. They don't really audit it, but they look at it to be sure that it really is in line with what the financials are saying. But they might not make an opinion on that, but they just want to be sure so that there's clarity that there's correlation between the financial statements and the work that has been done. Then there's also issues about the internal control deficiencies, which the Auditor General looks at. Are the internal controls up to scratch? And if they are not, the interventions must be done. If there's a problem, a huge problem, then there's an audit finding around that. Then there are other issues that have to do with the investigations. Because remember when I said the UIFWs are there, now I think you know now what I mean by UIFWs, the unauthorized, irregular, fruitless, and wasteful expenditure. When the UIFWs have happened, there must be investigations and all that. And if they are not done, there's a problem. So the Auditor General looks at that and if that has been done. Because we want to move to the end, let me just say, which is the last part of what we want to talk to you about. What then is your role? What then do we suggest as public participation in this regard? What we suggest as public participation, okay, I'm sorry, something went wrong here. I'm sorry about that, something just went wrong.
I don't see the presentation, Chair.
Yeah, but can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can see you.
My system went dead. It's trying to get on. Maybe because it's just the last presentation. Can you see the presentation now?
No, I can only see you.
Okay, let me just say what it says. I'll try and put it up so that you don't waste time. All we're saying now is that what role do you have to play as tertiary institution or tertiary education institution? I've tried to explain, maybe in the process, you've also begun to understand some of the role you can play. But amongst others, remember I've spoken about you attending our committee meetings. You can also submit some petitions on some of the things that you want us to investigate. But most important, you should contribute in assisting us to promote ethical governance. And I think that a number of you in the studies that you are undertaking can be able to see, to help us learn new ways on how we can ensure that we promote ethical governance. Sometimes that can lead us to launching investigation. And I've said you can comment on our work, particularly on financial management issues, and also you can comment on authorized bill. I'm hoping that after this session, some of you will also be able to tell us that these are some of the other things that you think that can be done by yourselves to assist in the work of Scopa. Obviously, it could be that there's still some other areas that we must be able to clarify with you, which we are willing to do, but obviously depending on your questions. And I think that we're going to take the questions now, and on the basis of that, we can be able then to determine how long our session is going to be. But if it so happens that we don't finish on time and there's still more questions, or you still haven't sent your questions, you still want to know more, Lerato is going to give you the email address of where you can send some of those things. Thank you very much. Let's take the questions.
Thank you, Chairperson. We do not have any questions, and I have posted my contact details, my mobile number, my email, in case our guests need more information about the work of Scopa. In terms of petitions, I've also posted an email address from our Public Participation and Petitions Unit. And we are also encouraging our a guest to follow the Gauteng Provincial Legislature on our social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. We will also send the link for house sittings as well as the Scopa committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping that some of the things that you have said today are going to be helpful to you. Yes, as Lerato said, you could make some suggestions later, and the email she said she has sent to you. So I hope that you'll be able to see it. The legislature has decided we call it to rise. In other words, we closed yesterday. We had our last sitting because we now, remember, our members come from political parties. So political parties are now engaged in the election campaign, so our work has been suspended. We are only going to come back, I think it's the 9th of November. So we'll start communicating with you then. However, in between, you can still ask your questions. We'll be able to answer them as to the best of our ability. But then with what Lerato is saying about inviting you to our meetings, it's something that we will do, but as from November when we come back. What is going to be important is that at that time, Scopa is going to be extremely busy because we will be considering the annual reports of the 15 votes and the 19 entities. What we normally do, we call the office of the AG to come and explain what is contained there, what did they find. Then from there, we generate questions to department that they must account. They must give us details of what went wrong, what are the issues. And then in addition, we then say to them, what are your interventions? Give us your intervention plans. We call them audit action plans. So we ask them to give us their own audit action plans. We monitor those because they must be addressing the issues that must be dealt with. So that we are going to be extremely busy when you come back, and I think that you'll find our meetings interesting. You can be able to join us, like Lerato said. I want to thank you very much for taking this time to join us. Maybe some of you are supposed to be studying now, but you thought that it's important to choose us. I'm told it's something called opportunity cost. You have to choose between studying and coming here. But I hope this was you got invaluable information that is going to be helping you to be an active citizen and able to help Scopa to do its work and ensure that it strengthens its oversight responsibility, lawmaking and cooperative governments through your process of public participation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Lerato.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and we thank you and welcome the comprehensive presentation. And we also thank our guests for their time. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned. You can see my contact on the chat box. Thank you. Goodbye.